Well, I agree with Alice very much. I would broaden the principle. Let's take us back to what Michael had said earlier also. What you want to do in the case of digging out of a hole, which is what we're doing, is get money into the hands of people and organizations that will spend it. So states certainly qualify. They're broke or close broke. Localities are worse in many cases. And if you give them more money, they will spend it. Now, money is fungible. You may not get exactly what you're expecting, but in some sense, you're not that concerned in a deep recession. You just want spending. The problem I have is I sit here as a citizen rather than as an economist, and I'm looking at Congress completely tied up in knots and finding it very difficult to believe that Congress can do any, I was almost going to say anything intelligent, anything, intelligent or unintelligent, about these issues, about stimulus or even about long-run deficit reduction, both of which we need to do. By the way, I'm looking at the struggle Congress had to get a puny $26 billion out to the states and localities, even though all of these people, members of Congress, have constituents in each of these 50 states. I'm looking at the struggle we had to get extended unemployment benefits pushed back through, extended through November. And all of that makes me very pessimistic about anything serious coming out of the Congress.
Doug, do you share Alan Blinder's pessimism?
Well, I think Alan's given us a pretty accurate description of the lay of the land in Congress, and I don't think that's to anyone's credit. So, part of the problem, I believe, is that we're not really having a serious debate on the merits of the best way to go forward. So, for example, I think that the proposals you've heard from Alice and Alan are not the way we should go, but I believe it for the following reasons. We should do now things that we would do anyway in the interest of long-run growth and which we will not have to unwind. This country has spent far more than it can afford and will have to scale back at the federal level its spending promises and may still have to raise taxes even if it does that. You do not want in this moment to do more things that you have to unwind, given politically how difficult that is. Every time you do, you send shivers down the spines of the business community, who in the end are the key to making this go. So that's why I think the strategy should be, what would we like to do anyway? Well, we'd like to sell to the 95% of the world's customers who are outside our borders. Let's stop being on the sidelines in international trade, give our workers a chance to sell things abroad, and get back to work. Let's cut a corporate tax rate that is deeply uncompetitive, hurts every American, and the bulk of that hurt comes down on workers in large corporations whose benefits are not good and whose jobs are endangered. Let's get the long-run budget deficit in order. I mean, these are things that we're going to need to do anyway and which would help right now.
This debate on lowering corporate taxes has been going on now ever since the Bush administration left office. Michael Greenberger, do you believe lowering corporate taxes is part of the key to restoring the economy?
Well, let me preface that by saying that ever since Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, we have had one version or another of supply side, what I would call supply side economics, and that is cutting taxes for wealthy institutions and wealthy people will somehow springboard the economy into a utopian recovery and prosperity. And the Bush administration's 8 years in office is the poster child for that. We ran up a $6 trillion. We went from a surplus when President Clinton left office in the last fiscal year to a $6 trillion run-up because of the tax break. Talk about things that can't be reversed. Now, with the Republicans screaming for deficit reduction, one of the key ways is to get the top 2% of the people to go back and pay what they were paying before President Bush went into office, and they are now making that an impossibility. That is not the way to stimulate the economy. I agree with Douglas Holtz-Eakin's theory that we need growth. I believe, if I understand his theory, the way we get growth is to cut taxes and have more free trade agreements. I think we have to have growth by targeted help to those portions of the economy who can create products, inventions, devices that will sell worldwide. Just to give you an example, the first stimulus package threw out a ton of money for medical research. It was unfocused, undirected, and there was no policy how to convert the bench science into commercial products. We have medical researchers in this country that can develop countermeasures to fight diseases all over the world. We have to put our shoulder to the wheel to help those people get the vaccines, the medicines, and what have you that will make people live longer and be healthier. My problem with the stimulus is that it was unfocused and not targeted. We need targeted stimulus. I don't think tax cuts and free trade agreements are going to do anything to correct what is a serious financial problem.
Alan Blinder, there is a new poll out from CBS News suggesting that 56% of Americans say the tax cuts should expire for households earning over $250,000 a year. Now, on this issue of tax cuts, and as Doug Eakin has pointed out, specifically corporate tax cuts, where do you stand?
Well, I think, by the way, if you pulled the corporate tax cut, you would get a lot more opposition to that. But the truth about our corporate tax is that it's a mess and needs reform terribly, as I'm sure Doug will agree. But the other truth is, because of that, it doesn't raise nearly the revenue that a lot of people think. We have this putatively high tax rate, which, as conservatives constantly point out correctly, looks to be higher than other countries. But it's riddled with loopholes, so we don't actually collect that much revenue. So I just don't see this, and the companies know that. That's why they have all these lawyers and accountants. So I don't think they're very afraid of the corporate income tax. And that's why I think it's a secondary issue at best, probably a tertiary issue. It is, for the long run, it would be a lot better to clean it up and make it a more rational system with, by the way, a lower statutory tax rate, but many fewer loopholes, so that some of that revenue was actually collected. But to think that that's going to do anything much for the economy in the next year or two, I think, is to engage in wishful thinking.
Alice Rivlin, considering the gridlock that currently exists within the Congress and likely will exist after November, what about a change in this tax rate? Do you see the administration pushing to let the Bush tax cuts expire? Do you see pressure from Republicans pushing to see them maintained?
Yes, is the answer to that. I see both of those things.
Yeah.
I am less pessimistic than you are about the gridlock being sustained after the election. I think there's a chance that there will be a more constructive attitude in both.
What leads you to believe that?
Because we're in a mess. And before an election is the worst time to fix anything. Right after the election, I'm always an optimist, but I think there's a chance that sensible people in both parties, and that includes the president, will come together both on what to do in the short run and, more importantly, what to do in the long run. And here I agree with, I think, where both Alan Blinder and Doug Holtz-Eakin are. We need serious tax reform. That should include lowering rates, including the corporate rate, but broadening the base of the tax, and doing the same for the individual income tax. So we raise more money with less rates, with lower rates, and we're going to need that money as we face long-run deficits.
Michael Greenberger.
I tend to have agreement on two different points with Douglas Holtz-Eakin and Alice Rivlin. Number one, I think it is irrelevant whether Congress is gridlocked. And I think Douglas Holtz-Eakin made this point. People have to speak clearly about what they want done and not couch or pull their punches because they're worried it's going to be rejected in the political stream. And I must say, I worry about the Obama administration. One day they're focusing on this deficit commission. The next day they're focusing on helping the states or helping small businesses. And there isn't a clear, driven message. And frankly, if I were the, first of all, this idea that we're in a recovery, things are better, I think in a month we're going to say we're back where we were in the fall of 2008 and maybe worse. And I think that goes to Alice's point that we are in a very serious problem.
Are you predicting a double-dip recession?
Well, for whatever it's worth, and I don't take myself seriously enough to give it a lot of worth, I do predict a double-dip recession and possibly something worse.
Alan Blinder, how about you?
I think a double-dip recession is unlikely, but not as unlikely as I'd like it to be. At this stage of a recovery, I should be answering a question like that Diane is saying, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that that's going to happen. That's just not true.
Right.
It may be a 20 or 30% probability. To me, that's uncomfortably high.
Alice, what about you?
I agree with Alan. I think it's unlikely, but it could happen.
And Doug Aiken?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely, but, if we make some mistakes, we could get a double dip. A lot of people, I think, were fooled by some of the special factors that went on late last year and the first half of this year. There was a big inventory swing. We did census hiring. We had cash for clunkers, sort of home buyer tax credits, a lot of things that distorted the month-to-month data a bit. I think if you strip that out, the economy's been growing at something like 1.5% to 2%, pretty much steadily, and it hasn't decelerated recently, which is what made people nervous. It just was never doing that well. And so it gets back to the point about which I think we all agree, the top priority should be faster economic growth, and I think the real difference is on strategies to get that in this environment.
And you're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. On this question of tax credits for new home buyers, the administration is considering another one. Does that make sense, Douglas Holtz-Eakin?
I don't think so, quite frankly. I have come to the somewhat pessimistic conclusion that there's no economically rational housing policy that would make a substantial difference and be politically acceptable. My experience on the campaign and coming up with what I thought were economically rational policies were that people hated them, and they were deeply unpopular politically. So in the end, I believe we are best advised to let the U.S. housing market muddle through. I think it is broadly at its bottom and will no longer be a drag on the economy. It will be neutral and then pick up in about 12 to 15 months. And we are dealt that hand. I think it's time to live with it.
Alan Blinder, what's your view?
Oh, I agree with a lot of what Doug just said, but I would come down in a very different place on policy. I think that a grievous mistake or series of mistakes were made 2 years ago and more about to do either nothing or next to nothing about what was clearly the coming tsunami of foreclosures. Now we have experienced those foreclosures. They're sort of peaking now at a very, very high peak. We could have done much better to shrink that peak. We wouldn't have stopped it, of course, but we could have had a smaller tsunami, if that sounds like a bad analogy, a wave instead of a tsunami. But we didn't. But I don't think it's too late. I think there are things that can be done. You see some private sector hedge funds doing right now, buying up mortgages cheaply, refinancing them so that the people in them can actually afford the homes, and you don't get the foreclosure, which causes terrible losses to both the borrower and the lender. So I think it was a failing of the Bush administration. It's been a failing of the Obama administration not to do more about this, and I still think we should.
Michael.
Well, Diane, if I could, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt. I just want to say that I think I agree completely with Alan. My point was the political point, that while it was economically rational and desirable, and I could write a list of things down that one might do, doing it on a big scale was unpopular with Americans. A lot of Americans looked at people in trouble in their homes and said, I didn't do that. I don't want to help them. And a private sector hedge fund can go in and do it with their own money in a way that the government just can't. And it may not be a credit to the political system, but I think that's what we just went through, and we remain there.
Michael?
Well, I find it sort of humorous that we are advocating lower taxes for corporations but not giving tax breaks to people who want to buy their first home. If there was any part of the stimulus package that worked, it was giving tax breaks to people who want to buy their home. The minute it stopped, the